So what we're doing tonight is a fruited baked apple, and I really like this recipe for several reasons. One, there's no sugar. Two, there's nothing in there that will kill you. Three, my kids really like it. So that's always a winning combination. And what I like to do is just to core the apple. I do not peel the apple. There's a lot of nutritional value in peelings, guys. Peelings of apples, peelings of potatoes. Don't eat peelings of bananas. But other kinds of peelings, keep the peelings on if you can. I do use organic apples. I don't use everything organic, but I do use organic apples. That's one thing that I always do, organic, okay? So I feel very comfortable leaving the peelings on. You want to core it. I don't have one of those fancy corers, but my mom was nice enough to give me this little gizmo. Thank you, Mama. And so I just whiz it out, and of course that didn't go so great. It's supposed to be really pretty, and that's not pretty. It's overripe. So normally that would be a pretty little apple, and you would sit that here. The recipe calls for 4 apples, but I actually find that it makes 6, which is great because you'll end up eating all 6. The other thing about this recipe is you can use it as a dessert, just a standalone dessert, or you can also use it as a breakfast, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. So we'll throw this away here. So once you've got your apple cored, then you're going to get your fruit ready, and it calls for 1/2 cup of chopped dates. Now when I buy my dates, I don't normally buy them already chopped. So I did get them already chopped for tonight just because I was making so many apples and I didn't want to spend all day in my kitchen chopping dates. So I cheated for tonight. But normally I just get regular dates. You know, they're really squishy. I do like the medjool dates, but any kind of date, just take the seed out and then chop away. And you want about 1/2 cup of dates. Which, you know, is roughly about 6 of these big dates. And I won't make you watch me cut all of that, but you can imagine that this is 1/2 cup. And then you want 1/2 cup of some other kind of dried fruit. And I happen to like apricots and cranberries, but you could do any other kind of dried fruit. Papaya, dried pineapple, raisins, whatever kind of dried fruit is fun for you, that's what you want to use. So I do like dried cranberries, and you can find dried cranberries that don't have any sugar on them. They're available right here in Brunswick. Back when Hannaford had the health food section, you know, in its own area, you could find them there. I've not looked for them since everything is everywhere now, to tell you the truth. I get them at the natural food store. But historically, regular dried cranberries without any sugar have been available at your regular grocery store. And then I also like to use some apricots. And it's not 1/2 cup of each, it's 1/2 cup of total. So whatever kind of dried fruit you want to use is fine. And I just chop it up. And I do chop the dried fruit up by hand because I have found that if I put it in a little food processor, it just gums it up and you just don't get very far. And in order for it to not get gummed up, you have to add some liquid, and I don't want the liquid, okay? And then the last thing that we add, hang on, let me get my hands here, are some nuts and seasonings. Now you can use any kind of nut. I like walnuts in particular. Pecans are nice. Those are sort of my 2 go-to nuts. My family would tell you that I am a nut, but is that true, Lily? Yeah. And for nuts, like for you guys today, I did, because I was doing such a large volume, I threw those into my food processor and, you know, just wound them up very quickly. Otherwise, if it's just a half a cup, I'm just going to do that by hand. I normally will use a chef's knife for that, which will make it easier, but you can do it this way. So you just want to chop your nuts up, and it doesn't need to be chopped up, you know, really finely. In fact, when I did it in my food processor for you tonight, it chopped it up, you know, a bit finer than I normally would, to tell you the truth. But whatever's fun for you, whatever works is fine. So you get your half a cup of nuts. You'll just mix it around, and then you're going to add your seasonings. So ginger, about a teaspoon of ginger. And you can use cinnamon, you can use cardamom, even a little turmeric is nice. Not a lot, because it can overpower it, but a little bit is nice. I do like a little cardamom, I like a little cloves, but we kept it simple for tonight, just with a little cinnamon and ginger. And once you get that mixed up, then you're just simply going to take that mixture and stuff your apple. If you can imagine, this is actually a round apple with a nice little hole in the middle. But if it's not, and to tell you the truth, tonight when I was making it for you guys, you know, I have these large pans, and we typically have a pretty large crowd here, you know, 80 to 90 people. So I wanted to make sure we had plenty, so I filled my pans really well, and I didn't always have room for the nice pretty little apple, so I chopped it in half and laid it on its side. So that's what we would do here. So we would just take this mixture and push it really nicely and tightly into that hole. Does that make sense? You're just going to fill the hole nicely with that mixture. So you've got your apple cored. Now my apple is full of yumminess, all right? And I'm going to fill my dish. And your innards here is going to be enough to fill about 6 apples, okay? Unless you take a ginormous hunk out of your core, you know, and in that instance you're missing a lot of, you're cutting out a lot of the apple. So once you get your dish full of apples, then you're going to take a half a cup of hot water. A half a cup of hot water, and pour it right into your dish. Just imagine half a cup of hot water poured right into my dish, and you're going to stick it in your oven. Okay, it could be 350 for, you know, about 40 minutes, 400 for 20 minutes. The lower the temperature and longer the time, the better. But if you're in a hurry, you can do it a little bit better, and you don't cover it, all right? And you want to bake it just long enough until the apple is soft. You don't want it mushy. No one wants a mushy apple, because that's just gross. That's like eating applesauce, but this isn't applesauce. And then when you're done, you're going to have these nice little pretty apples if you cored them well, so don't do what I did, right? And then what you can do, if it's for dessert, you'll scoop it out and put it on your dessert, you know, plate. If it's for breakfast, then you scoop it out and sit it right in the middle of a nice bowl of oatmeal. It's yummy. It's very yummy. You can serve it like this, or the other thing that I like to do, which we will do tonight, is make a little cashew cream. Now, we've talked about cashew cream in this program before, and it just adds an extra little oomph that I like. So when I refer to a nut in this program, it's always, always, always the raw nut, just the way the good Lord grew it. You know, it doesn't come in a little round blue container with a plastic lid with lots of salt and oil on it, right? It's just the raw, old-fashioned nut. When we're dealing with cashews, they need to be rinsed first. Okay, your walnuts and pecans and hazelnuts and all the other nuts do not need to be rinsed. But raw cashews, you definitely want to rinse them before you use them. And my husband sometimes will drive me nuts, because he really likes cashews, and occasionally he'll just go to the fridge, because this is literally how I keep them in my refrigerator, you know, in the jar. He'll go to the jar and just, you know, throw a few in his mouth, and I'm like, oh, wait on, did you rinse them off? No, I didn't, and he hasn't had any problems. But there are lots of people that can be a little bit sensitive to the raw cashews, so you want to rinse them off really, really well. The other thing with cashews is when you process them with water in a blender to make cashew cream, if you add that to something hot, it thickens that thing. So for example, when I make you know, creamy potato soup, and I cook the potatoes with the onions and the garlic and all of that, and then I go to add the cream, because this would be the cream. The ground cashews thicken that up, and it can thicken it up fairly quickly. We had biscuits and gravy this morning at my house for breakfast, and the gravy was made from cashew cream, and my oldest daughter really likes her gravy good and thick. So it doesn't take long to do that, but it's important to be mindful of that. If you're using cashew cream for other things like making Alfredo sauce or any of the other kind of creamy, savory types of dishes that you would use cream for, you can use cashew cream. Just be mindful that it'll thicken up if you cook it terribly long at all, okay? So what you're gonna do for this one is you're just going to take about, the recipe says a cup. I use a half a cup because I don't think you need a lot of it, but some of it is good. So we're just going to rinse this off. And it's a 1-to-1 proportion. We've got a half a cup of our cashews, and now we'll get a half a cup of water. And that's it. That's all that goes in your blender. And this happens to be a fancy schmancy blender. It's a Vitamix, and I love them. I won't go without one. A lady gave me one years ago, and I remember thinking, what am I ever going to do with this thing? Because it literally was older than me, like literally older than me. And once I used it, I thought, wow, you know, I've got a real Cadillac here, and I did. And it recently went by the way of the birds, and my mom very kindly shared one with me, so I was grateful for that. But you don't have to have a fancy blender. Just a regular old-fashioned normal blender will work, but you want to blend it really well so that it's not granular, there's no, you know, grainy. You want it to be nice and smooth, and what you're going to come out with is this. All right, it's literally just the cashews and the water mixed. Does that make sense? I'm not going to make you suffer through the sound of this thing whizzing, because you can imagine what that's like. But it just comes out just like this. Now your recipe will say to add a little bit of maple syrup. I did not add maple syrup. Sometimes I do. It depends on the sweetness of the apples, okay? So the apples that I got for us tonight, I thought were really quite sweet and didn't need any extra. But sometimes you get apples and they're a little tart, and there's not a lot of sweetness to them. And in that instance, I might add a little bit of maple syrup to this as I pour it over my apples. Does that make sense? Otherwise, I don't. It's just the cashews and the water, blended down to a cream. And this in this jar, we'll use it tonight to pour over our apples. And if there's any left, it's going in a soup tomorrow as a thickener for the soup. Does that make sense? It's handy stuff to keep around if you're accustomed to cream-based things and you're wanting to shy away from the regular cream and use something healthier. Yes, ma'am?
How long can you keep that mixture in the refrigerator after you put it together?
You know, I've never kept it in my refrigerator long enough to know. When I make it, I know, I've already planned ahead for when I'm going to use it. So the longest I've kept it is probably about 3 days, and I absolutely had no problem. Now, I don't suggest freezing this because I have done that. I've made some in advance, not used it or changed my menu, and ended up sticking it in the freezer and it separated. I did put it back in the blender and mix it back up and it was okay. It's just I had to go through that process again, and so I may as well just make it fresh if I'm going to have to do that. Yes, ma'am.
So how many cups of cashews do you think is in that jar?
This is 4 cups of cashews and 4 cups of water.
Just wondering how much it. How come it turns white?
Because the cashew is a whitish color. Yeah. Yeah, once you add the water to it and it opens up the cashew, it becomes a more of a creamy kind of color. Any other questions? All right, this is a really fun recipe, particularly as we get closer to the holidays, and now that the apples came in late, but they were plentiful, and we're all grateful for that. It's a great way to use your apples, and like I said, it's a great dessert, just a standalone dessert, or it's really fun for breakfast. So if you make it for dessert, Saturday night, then Sunday morning you can have another apple on top of your oatmeal or on top of your waffle or anything like that. So when you make stuff like this, think of other ways that you can use it, because you may not just be stuck with one.